My boss refused to let me see my wife giving birth, and I hugged him, saying thank you. Miranda's contractions were 8 minutes apart when she called me at 2:14 p.m., saying I needed to get to the hospital now. I grabbed my keys and laptop when my manager Dominic intercepted me at the elevator. The Thornton presentation started in 15 minutes, and they'd specifically requested me as lead. $2 million contract on the line. Dominic's face was stone, but something flickered in his eyes when I explained about Miranda. Get Johnson to cover. My wife is having our baby. I jabbed the elevator button repeatedly. Dominic shook his head. Said Thornton would walk if I didn't show. The whole team's quarterly bonus depended on this deal. He promised it would be quick, 2 hours maximum. Miranda's labor with her first kid took 14 hours, so I'd have plenty of time. The lies started immediately. Thornton had brought his entire team instead of just 2 people. The conference room filled with executives asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and resource allocation. My phone buzzed constantly in my pocket. 7 minutes apart, 6 minutes, 5. I started speaking faster to push through slides, cut short my usual explanations, and skipped the interactive demos. Thornton's team looked confused at the rushed pace, but I powered through. When they asked questions, I gave quick answers instead of my usual detailed responses. Dominic kept trying to elaborate, but I cut him off, frustrated, and still having no idea that being kept here was the best thing that would ever happen to me. I flipped through 3 slides at once. By 4 p.m., the contractions were 3 minutes apart, according to Miranda's texts. She was begging me to come. Her sister was driving from 2 hours away but might not make it. I tried wrapping up, but Thornton's CFO had concerns about the payment structure. Dominic kept the discussion going whenever I tried to exit. We need to address every concern today or they walk, Dominic whispered during a break. When I told him my wife was literally in labor, he placed his hand on my shoulder and said, I know. Please just trust me. I was confused. Did he know something about my wife's labor that I didn't? Either way, right after break I made a decision. Started agreeing to every demand Thornton's team made. Cut our profit margin to close faster. Threw in free implementation hours. Whatever it took to get signatures now. Dominic's eyes widened, but I didn't care. If you sign today, we'll include the platinum package, usually $50,000 extra. I slid the contract across the table. Thornton's team exchanged looks. They knew I was desperate, but couldn't resist the deals. Started signing pages while their lawyer scrambled to document the new terms. I paced by the window watching traffic build on the highway, calculating drive times to the hospital. At 5:23 p.m., Miranda stopped texting. The silence was worse than the constant messages. Either she was too far into labor or something had gone wrong. Dominic kept peering into my phone like he was looking for something. My hands shook signing signature pages while Thornton's lawyer explained terms I wasn't processing. I texted Miranda's sister asking for updates. Nothing. Called the hospital, but they couldn't give information over the phone. Started making mistakes on the paperwork. Wrong dates, illegible signatures. Had to redo pages while precious minutes ticked by. Dominic noticed my panic and took over the presentation. Smoothly handled objections while I sat there imagining Miranda alone in delivery. The baby coming too fast. Complications from being premature. All the things that could go wrong without me there to make decisions. Just need these last forms notarized. Thornton's lawyer pulled out more documents. I lost it. I slammed my hand on the table and said we could handle notaries tomorrow. My wife is having our baby right now. Thornton himself stood up and told his team they had enough for today. Shook my hand and said, family comes first. Dominic went pale, trying to interrupt with technicalities like he was deliberately trying to stop me from leaving. But why would he want me to show up late to the birth of my own child? 6:47 p.m. was when we finally closed the deal. Thornton's team wanted to celebrate, but I was already running for the door. Dominic caught up in the parking garage and insisted on driving me. Said I was too emotional to drive safely. I was too desperate to argue. The drive took 23 minutes in rush hour traffic. Dominic kept making wrong turns that added time. Missed the hospital exit and had to circle back. Found the furthest parking spot from the entrance. Each delay felt deliberate, like he was doing this on purpose. Just drop me at emergency. I grabbed for the wheel. Construction. Have to go around. Dominic stayed maddeningly calm. I tried calling Miranda again. Straight to voicemail. Her sister finally texted back. At hospital. Baby coming fast. Complications. That single word made me physically sick. I demanded Dominic let me out so I could run. He ignored me and kept driving slowly. I finally bailed out at a stop sign and ran. I sprinted through the hospital entrance. Took stairs instead of waiting for elevators. Burst through security doors, setting off alarms. Labor and delivery wing was chaos when I arrived at 7:19 p.m. Nurses were rushing past with equipment, monitors beeping. I gave Miranda's name at the desk, and the nurse's expression changed. She called for a doctor who appeared within seconds. We need to talk about your wife's delivery. The doctor guided me down a hallway away from the chaos. We entered a small consultation room with 2 chairs and a desk. She closed the door and introduced herself as Dr. Elena Gates. She told me to sit down, but I stayed standing. My legs felt weak, but sitting seemed impossible. Dr. Gates explained that Miranda went into active labor around 4 p.m., with contractions speeding up much faster than expected. The baby's heart rate started dropping around 5:30 p.m. They monitored it for 15 minutes, but it kept falling. Fetal distress meant they needed to do an emergency C-section immediately. They performed the surgery at 5:45 p.m. Miranda was sedated and recovering in a different unit. Our son Grayson was born premature and needed respiratory support. He was in the NICU on a CPAP machine, but his condition was stable. I processed the timeline in my head. 4 p.m. was when I was still in the conference room rushing through slides. 5:30 p.m. was when Thornton's lawyer was pulling out more forms to notarize. 5:45 p.m. was when I was signing the final pages with shaking hands. I missed everything. Dr. Gates kept talking and I forced myself to focus. She walked me through the medical details. Miranda's contractions accelerated much faster than typical first labors. The baby came so quickly that even if I'd left at 4 p.m., I might have missed the actual delivery. But I could have been there for Miranda during the decision-making. I could have held her hand when they told her about the fetal distress. I could have been in the room when they rushed her to surgery. Instead, she faced all of it alone while I was arguing about payment structures. Dr. Gates mentioned something odd then. She said the hospital received multiple phone calls from someone identifying himself as calling from my workplace. The caller asked about Miranda's status and whether I needed to be present for consent on emergency procedures. The calls were logged, but no medical information was released because of privacy rules. I asked what time the calls came in. Dr. Gates checked her notes and said between 4:30 and 5:15 p.m. Someone from my office was calling the hospital to track Miranda's labor. Dr. Gates left me in the consultation room and said a social worker would come get me soon. I sat down finally and pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Miranda's number. 2 voicemails I couldn't bring myself to listen to. A woman knocked and entered without waiting for a response. She introduced herself as Rosa Greer from the NICU social work team. She carried a folder thick with forms and consent documents. Rosa walked me through everything with careful patience. Visiting hours for NICU parents. Hand-washing requirements that were stricter than regular hospital protocol. What to expect from Grayson's probable 2-week stay. How to read the monitors. What the different alarms meant. When I could hold him. I signed forms with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. My signature looked nothing like my usual writing. Rosa explained premature infant care protocols and feeding schedules. She talked about developmental milestones and follow-up appointments. None of it felt real. Rosa asked if I was ready to see Grayson. I nodded because what else could I do? She led me through more hallways to the NICU entrance. We stopped at a sink where she showed me the proper hand-washing technique. Soap up to the elbows. Scrub for 2 full minutes. Use the paper towels to turn off the faucet. The NICU was quieter than I expected. Soft beeping from monitors. Hushed voices from nurses. Rosa brought me to an isolette in the corner. She told me this was Grayson. I looked through the clear plastic at my son for the first time. He was so small, smaller than I imagined a baby could be. A CPAP mask covered most of his face. Monitoring leads attached to his chest with thin wires. An IV line ran into his impossibly tiny hand. His skin looked almost transparent. I could see the veins underneath. His chest moved up and down with rapid breaths. The guilt hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the isolette to stay standing. This was my son, and I wasn't there when he was born. I wasn't there when Miranda needed me. I was in a conference room giving away profit margins to close a deal faster. Rosa touched my arm gently and said I could stay as long as I wanted. She left me alone with Grayson. I stood there watching him breathe, counting each tiny rise and fall of his chest. The monitors beeped steadily. I pulled out my phone and texted Miranda's sister asking how Miranda was doing during the labor. The response came back within a minute. We'll talk later. The coldness in those 3 words told me everything. Miranda had shared how long it took me to get here, how I chose a meeting over being present for our baby's birth. Her sister's anger came through clearly even in a short text. I tried to see Miranda next. Asked a nurse at the NICU station where the recovery unit was located. She checked her computer and said Miranda was still heavily sedated from the emergency procedure. She suggested I come back in a few hours and focus on bonding with Grayson instead. I went back to the NICU family waiting area. Rosa had mentioned the hospital call logs. I asked at the front desk if I could see the records of calls that came in asking about Miranda. The receptionist checked with her supervisor and printed out a call log sheet. 3 calls from my office main number. First one at 4:32 p.m., asking if Miranda Carson was admitted and if the father needed to be present for emergency decisions. Second call at 4:47 p.m., asking for an update on her status. Third call at 5:14 p.m., asking the same questions again. I stared at the 4:47 p.m. timestamp. That was during the conference room break. Dominic had pulled me aside in the hallway. He placed his hand on my shoulder and told me we needed to address every concern today, or Thornton would walk. He was on his phone during that conversation. I remembered him looking at the screen and then back at me. Now I understood what he was checking. He was tracking Miranda's labor progress to calculate exactly how long he could keep me in that meeting. I texted Dominic a simple message. Why did you call the hospital during Miranda's labor? His response came back immediately. Just checking if you had time to finish the presentation. Wanted to make sure the medical team had contact information if they needed you urgently. The casual tone of his response made my skin crawl. He was treating my wife's medical emergency like a project timeline to be managed. I deleted the text messages, stared at my phone screen until it went dark. Then I walked to the hospital administrative office on the second floor. The woman at the desk had reading glasses on a chain and a coffee mug that said, "World's Best Mom." I explained I needed to start FMLA paperwork for my son's NICU stay and my wife's recovery. She typed into her computer for a minute, asked for my employee ID number and company name, typed some more. Her face changed slightly and she picked up her phone. Called someone named Rosa, who arrived 5 minutes later with a folder. Rosa had kind eyes and wore scrubs with tiny teddy bears printed on them. She asked if we could talk in a private consultation room. We sat at a small table and she opened the folder. Asked if I had filed preliminary FMLA forms when I knew my wife's due date was approaching. I said no. I thought I could just start the paperwork when the baby came. Rosa nodded slowly and explained that without preliminary forms, there was no protected leave in place. My job security depended completely on my employer being willing to grant me time off. She used the phrase goodwill of your employer. I felt the floor drop out from under me, asked what that meant practically. Rosa said it meant they could require me to return to work immediately or face termination. They could deny leave requests. They could count any absence as unexcused. She said many employers are understanding about family emergencies, but legally they don't have to be. The words felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing to grab onto. My phone buzzed in my pocket while Rosa was talking. I ignored it. She was explaining options for retroactive FMLA filing, but said it required employer cooperation. Buzzing continued. 3 times. 4. Rosa paused and suggested I check if it was important. I pulled out my phone and saw the team group chat exploding with messages. 17 new notifications. I opened it and immediately felt sick. Everyone celebrating the Thornton deal closing. Mark posted a gif of people throwing money in the air. Sarah wrote that she was already planning how to spend her quarterly bonus. 3 people were discussing taking vacation days they'd been putting off. Johnson said this was exactly the win the team needed after last quarter's rough numbers. The excitement in their messages made my stomach turn over. They had no idea what that meeting had cost me. No idea I'd been trapped there while Miranda went through emergency surgery alone. I scrolled through message after message of celebration and felt physically ill. Had to mute the conversation before I typed something I couldn't take back. Set my phone face down on the table. Rosa was watching me with concern. Asked if I was okay. I said I was fine and asked her to continue explaining the FMLA situation. She went through the steps I'd need to take. Medical certification forms, employer notification procedures, appeal options if they denied coverage. My phone buzzed again. Different notification sound. Voicemail. I picked it up and saw it was from a number I didn't recognize. Checked the voicemail and heard Joaquin Wolf's voice. He was Thornton's CFO, the one who'd asked all the payment structure questions that afternoon. His message thanked me for the productive extended discussion and said he appreciated my thorough answers to their concerns. Then he said something that made me stop breathing. He mentioned that Dominic had specifically requested they take 30 more minutes to thoroughly review objections during the afternoon session. Said Dominic felt it was important to address every detail before moving forward. Wolf sounded slightly confused about why that was necessary since his team had been ready to sign earlier. But he thanked me again and said he looked forward to working together. I played the message twice to make sure I heard it correctly. Dominic had asked them to take more time, had deliberately extended the meeting beyond what the client even wanted. The confirmation sat in my chest like a weight. Rosa was still talking about paperwork, but I wasn't processing her words anymore. I thanked her and said I needed to go check on my wife. She handed me forms to complete and said to bring them back whenever I was ready. I walked back through the hospital hallways feeling numb. Checked the time and saw it was almost 11 p.m. 9 hours since I'd arrived. 9 hours since I'd missed everything that mattered. A nurse stopped me outside Miranda's recovery room and checked her chart. Said Miranda had woken up about 20 minutes ago and was asking for me. The nurse's expression was careful and neutral in a way that made me nervous. She opened the door and gestured for me to go in. Miranda was propped up on pillows looking exhausted and pale. Her hair was pulled back messily, and she had an IV in her left hand. When she saw me, her face crumpled. Tears started immediately mixed with something that looked like anger. She asked where I was, why it took so long. Her voice cracked on the words. I stood there with no answer that didn't sound like an excuse, opened my mouth and closed it again. She waited. I finally told her the basic truth. Said I stayed in a meeting too long because my manager convinced me I had time and I was wrong. The words sounded hollow even as I said them. Miranda stared at me for a long moment, then asked if I chose work over being here for her. The silence before I answered told her everything. I could see it in her eyes, the way they changed from confused and hurt to something harder. She turned her face away from me toward the window. Said she needed me during the scariest moment of her life and I wasn't there. Her voice was flat now, controlled. She said the medical team kept asking if they should wait for her husband. if they should hold off on the emergency procedure. She had to tell them to just do whatever was necessary because she didn't know where I was or when I'd arrive. Had to make the decision alone while they were telling her the baby's heart rate was dropping. I tried to explain about Dominic's delays and the suspicious phone calls. Started telling her about the hospital call logs and the voicemail from Wolf. Miranda cut me off, said it doesn't matter why. What matters is that I made a choice to stay in that conference room even after her contractions were 3 minutes apart. She said I chose to believe Dominic instead of trusting my own judgment about what my wife needed. She was right. The truth of it sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. I had made that choice. Every minute I stayed in that room was a choice. Every time I looked at my phone and kept talking about implementation timelines was a choice. Dominic had manipulated the situation, but I had let him. I stood there next to her bed with nothing to say that would make it better. Miranda closed her eyes and said she was tired, asked me to leave so she could rest. I wanted to stay, but she turned away from me and I knew I had no right to push. Walked back out into the hallway and just stood there breathing. I went back to the NICU family waiting area and found an uncomfortable chair in the corner. Sat down and pulled out my phone to check Grayson's status on the parent portal. His oxygen levels were stable, heart rate steady. I put my phone away and just sat watching the hallway. Other parents came and went, some crying, some looking numb. Around 2 a.m., a couple came out of the NICU holding each other and sobbing. I looked away, spent the rest of the night in that chair listening to sounds from the NICU, beeps and alarms from monitors, quiet voices of nurses doing rounds. Every alarm made my heart speed up, made me think something was wrong with Grayson. I'd check my phone and see his stats were fine, but the fear didn't go away. Just sat there in the dark, realizing this helpless, scared feeling was what Miranda felt alone while I was PowerPointing through contract terms. She went through all of this by herself, made impossible decisions by herself, faced her worst fears by herself. Because I wasn't there. I watched the sky start to lighten through the windows around 5 a.m. My phone buzzed at exactly 6 a.m. with an email notification. Warren Huff from HR. The subject line said, "Congratulations and Thornton contract discussion." I opened it and saw corporate cheerfulness that felt obscene. Warren congratulated me on the baby and said he hoped everyone was doing well. Then asked to schedule a brief debrief on the Thornton contract process and timeline. Said it was standard procedure after major deals to review what went well and identify improvement opportunities. Wanted to set up a call for later in the week. The message felt wrong on every level. Like someone asking about quarterly targets at a funeral. But I recognized it as normal business procedure. The kind of thing that happens regardless of personal circumstances. I didn't respond. Just set my phone down and watched nurses change shifts outside the NICU doors. I pulled out my phone and opened Warren's email again. Read it twice to make sure I understood what he was really asking. Then I started typing a response right there in the waiting area chair. Kept the language direct but professional. Told Warren I needed to take immediate family leave starting today. Explained that my son was in the NICU and my wife was recovering from emergency surgery. Then I added a paragraph about concerns regarding my manager's interference with my ability to reach the hospital during a medical emergency. Said I had documentation of the timeline and circumstances that prevented me from being present during the delivery. Copied my personal email address on the message in case I needed the paper trail later. Hit send at 6:23 a.m. and immediately started gathering evidence before I lost my nerve. I went through my text messages with Miranda and took screenshots of every single one with the timestamps visible. Started at 2:14 p.m. when she first called and went all the way through to when she stopped texting at 5:23 p.m. The progression was brutal to look at. 8 minutes apart, 6 minutes, 3 minutes. Her messages getting more scared and desperate while I stayed in that conference room. I found the parking garage ticket in my wallet and took a photo showing I left at 6:47 p.m. Found Dominic's text messages and screenshotted those too. His casual check-ins during the meeting asking how things were going. His offer to drive me that I now realized was about control. I opened my email and found the message thread with Rosa from yesterday where she mentioned the hospital call logs. Sent her a message asking if I could access those records for my own documentation. She responded within minutes saying she'd print them out for me. By 7:30 a.m., I had a folder on my phone with everything organized by timestamp. The evidence made Dominic's deliberate stalling completely clear. Dr. Gates showed up during morning rounds and saw me sitting in the waiting area surrounded by phone screens and notes. She asked if I was okay and I said I was compiling some work documentation. She nodded and said she wanted to walk me through the emergency C-section decision process since I'd missed the initial explanation. We went to a quiet consultation room and she pulled up Miranda's chart on a tablet. She explained that when fetal distress happens the way it did with Grayson, they don't wait for spousal consent because minutes matter for the baby's brain oxygen. The heart rate dropped suddenly around 5:30 p.m., and they had Miranda in the operating room within 15 minutes. She said even if I'd left the office at 4 p.m., I probably would have missed the actual delivery. But I could have been there for Miranda during the scary decision-making process. The explanation made me feel slightly less guilty about not being there to sign forms, but it didn't touch the guilt about Miranda facing it alone. Dr. Gates was gentle but honest. said Miranda had been terrified and asking for me repeatedly. Around 9 a.m., Miranda's sister finally arrived at the hospital. I saw her get off the elevator and head straight for Miranda's room without acknowledging me in the hallway. 10 minutes later, she came out and asked if we could talk privately. We walked to a quiet corner near the hospital chapel, and she crossed her arms. She told me she'd called my office around 4:15 p.m. when Miranda's contractions were getting really serious. Said she was transferred to someone named Dominic, who assured her I was handling things and would leave as soon as the client meeting wrapped up. Her voice was cold and angry. She said Dominic told her the meeting would be quick and I'd be at the hospital well before anything critical happened. I felt sick. Asked if she still had the call log on her phone. She pulled it out and showed me. There was the timestamp, 4:15 p.m. Dominic's name in her notes from when he identified himself. She said he sounded very confident and professional. Told her these first babies always take forever anyway, and that I'd have plenty of time. The calculated lie made my hands shake. She kept scrolling through her phone and then stopped. Said she'd saved a voicemail from that call because something about it felt off at the time. She played it on speaker. Dominic's voice came through smooth and reassuring. He said he'd personally make sure I left in time. Said these first babies always take forever anyway, so there was no need to panic. His tone was casual and confident, like he was discussing a project deadline instead of my wife's labor. I asked her to send me that voicemail. She did it right there, and I saved it to 3 different places. The evidence kept building, and I knew I needed to confront Dominic directly. He showed up at the hospital around 11 a.m., carrying flowers and a card that said, "Thinking of you." I saw him ask at the main desk for Miranda's room number, and I intercepted him before he could get to the elevator. Told him we needed to talk and led him down to the cafeteria. We got coffee and sat at a corner table. I pulled out my phone and played him the voicemail from Miranda's sister without any introduction. Watched his face as his own voice came through the speaker, talking about making sure I left in time. His expression cycled through surprise and then quick calculation, and then he shifted into smooth corporate concern mode. Started talking about team pressure and quarterly targets like that, explained everything. I asked him directly why he delayed me. Dominic leaned back and said he was protecting my standing with the client. Said missing the delivery by a few hours wouldn't matter in the long run, but losing the Thornton account would have permanently damaged my career. He actually believed this. Talked about how he was thinking long-term about my professional development. The paternalistic logic made me want to flip the cafeteria table. I kept my voice level and asked about the drive to the hospital. Asked why he took wrong turns and parked in the furthest spot from the entrance. Dominic didn't even hesitate. Said he was driving slowly and choosing longer routes because he genuinely thought I was too emotional to be safe behind the wheel. Said I needed time to calm down before seeing Miranda. He was completely serious, sitting there with his coffee talking about how he'd made good management decisions by controlling every aspect of my emergency. He kept using phrases like supporting the team and balancing competing priorities. The realization hit me that Dominic actually saw himself as helping me. He wasn't being malicious. He truly believed he'd made the right calls by keeping me in that meeting and controlling my drive to the hospital. He thought he was protecting my career and my emotional state. The paternalistic certainty in his voice was somehow worse than if he'd been deliberately cruel. I stood up from the table without saying another word. I walked straight to the NICU without looking back. My hands were still shaking from the conversation, but I needed to get everything down while it was fresh. I found an empty family consultation room and pulled out my phone. Started typing every word Dominic had said in the cafeteria. The exact phrases about protecting my career. His justification for the slow drive about me being too emotional. The way he kept saying he was supporting the team. I documented timestamps from my memory and added notes about his body language and tone. The paternalistic certainty in his voice when he talked about making good management decisions. I saved the document to 3 different places, including my personal email. Then I went through my phone and screenshotted every text message from that day. Miranda's contractions getting closer together. Her messages begging me to come. The silence at 5:23 p.m. that still made my stomach drop. I organized everything into a folder with clear labels and timestamps. Added the voicemail from Miranda's sister with Dominic's voice promising to get me there in time. The hospital call logs Rosa had helped me access. The parking garage ticket showing when I finally left the office at 6:47 p.m. I was building a case and I knew it. My phone rang and Warren's name appeared on the screen. I answered, and he asked if I could come to the office for a formal conversation about my email. I told him I wasn't leaving the hospital while my son was in the NICU, and my wife was recovering from emergency surgery. Suggested he could come here if it was urgent. Warren paused for maybe 3 seconds and then said he'd be there within 2 hours. Asked if there was a private place we could talk. I gave him directions to the family consultation area near the NICU and hung up. Checked the time and realized it was barely noon. The whole confrontation with Dominic had taken less than an hour, but it felt like days. Warren showed up exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes later, carrying a laptop bag and a yellow legal pad. He was wearing a suit without the jacket and looked professionally neutral. We shook hands and sat down at the small table in the consultation room. Warren opened his laptop and pulled out the legal pad with a pen. He explained that my email had raised serious concerns that required immediate investigation. His voice was calm and measured. He said the company took workplace interference allegations very seriously, but that I should understand HR's ability to take action would depend on what the investigation revealed. He wasn't making promises, and I appreciated the honesty. Asked if I was ready to walk him through what happened. I pulled out my phone and started from the beginning. Showed him Miranda's text with timestamps starting at 2:14 p.m. Walked him through Dominic intercepting me at the elevator and insisting I stay for the meeting. Explained how the presentation kept getting extended with Dominic steering every conversation back to details that prolonged the discussion. Warren took notes without visible reaction. His pen moved steadily across the legal pad, filling page after page. I showed him the hospital call logs with the 3 calls from my office number, asking about Miranda's status and whether I needed to be present for emergency decisions. Warren's pen paused for just a second on that detail, and then kept writing. I played him the voicemail from Miranda's sister with Dominic's voice promising to get me there in time. Showed him my parking garage ticket proving I didn't leave until 6:47 p.m. Walked him through the drive to the hospital with all the wrong turns and delays. Warren asked specific questions about each piece of evidence. He wanted exact times for the phone calls. Asked about witnesses who could verify the meeting timeline. Wanted to know if anyone else heard Dominic's statements in the cafeteria. I gave him names from the team who were in the conference room. Mentioned that the client himself had tried to end the meeting early. Warren wrote down every name and asked for contact information. Warren closed his laptop and set down his pen. He explained the investigation process would involve interviewing Dominic and everyone I'd mentioned as witnesses. Said I should expect it to take at least a week, maybe longer, depending on schedules. He was clear that outcomes might include coaching for Dominic or reassignment or formal discipline. But he also said termination was unlikely given Dominic's 15 years with the company and the lack of explicit policy violations. There was no rule that said a manager couldn't ask an employee to stay in a meeting. No policy about how long someone could take to drive to a hospital. Warren's tone stayed neutral, but I could hear what he wasn't saying. The company would protect itself first. The realistic assessment felt like a punch to the chest. I asked what the point of investigating was if nothing would really change. Warren looked at me directly and said something I wasn't expecting. He mentioned that my lack of filed FMLA paperwork meant the company had significant liability exposure if they retaliated against me for complaining. The words hung in the air between us. It wasn't justice, but it was leverage. Warren explained that any negative action against me now would look like retaliation and open the company up to legal claims. He said this off the record, but clearly wanted me to understand my position. I thanked him and he packed up his laptop. Said he'd be in touch as the investigation progressed and that I should focus on my family. We shook hands again, and he left. I went to check on Miranda and found her room empty. A nurse at the station told me she'd been moved to a monitoring unit. My heart dropped into my stomach. The nurse explained that Miranda's blood pressure had spiked, and she was showing signs of preeclampsia that hadn't resolved after delivery. They needed to keep her under observation for at least 24 hours. I asked if I could see her, and the nurse gave me the new room number. I walked down 2 floors feeling like the ground kept shifting under my feet. Found Miranda's new room and knocked softly before entering. She was hooked up to monitors with a blood pressure cuff automatically inflating every 15 minutes. Her face looked tired and scared. A doctor was reviewing her chart and explained they were managing her blood pressure with medication and watching for any complications. Said she couldn't leave the monitoring unit until her numbers stabilized, which meant she still couldn't come to the NICU to see Grayson. I spent the rest of the day going back and forth between Miranda's room and the NICU, walking the same hospital corridors over and over until I had the route memorized. Sat with Miranda during her blood pressure checks and medication rounds. Went to the NICU during Grayson's care times to hold him and talk to the nurses about his progress. I felt split in half, pulled between supporting my wife and bonding with my son. Miranda barely spoke to me. She answered questions with yes or no, didn't make eye contact, kept her face turned toward the window. I tried asking how she was feeling and got one-word responses. Fine. Tired. Okay. The distance between us felt like miles even though we were sitting 3 feet apart. I didn't know how to bridge the gap my absence had created. Every time I tried to explain about Dominic or the investigation, she just nodded without responding. I finally stopped trying and just sat there in silence. That night, I sat in the NICU family area with my laptop and wrote Miranda a letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual letter I could print out and give her. I apologized for choosing to stay in the meeting, even after her texts became urgent. Didn't make excuses about Dominic or the client pressure or the quarterly bonuses. Just acknowledged that I made the wrong choice, that my absence during her emergency was my fault regardless of who else contributed to the delay. I wrote that I should have left the second her contractions hit 5 minutes apart. Should have told Dominic and the client that nothing was more important than being there for her. I admitted I'd prioritized work over her safety and that she had every right to be angry. Said I couldn't take back missing Grayson's birth, but I could promise to show up for every moment after. I printed the letter at the hospital business center and folded it into an envelope. I brought the letter to Miranda's room the next morning, but she was asleep. I left it on her bedside table and went to sit with Grayson. Held him against my chest and felt his tiny heartbeat through the thin hospital gown. A nurse showed me how to change his diaper around all the monitoring wires, how to support his head properly. The weight of him in my hands was terrifying and perfect. My phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. Just one sentence. I'm not ready to talk about this yet, but I read it. I stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. She'd read my words and acknowledged them. That was more than I deserved right now. I texted back a simple okay and put my phone away. Focused on Grayson and the steady beeping of his monitors. It was a small opening and I'd take it. 3 days later, the bonus numbers posted to the company portal. I checked my phone during a NICU feeding session and watched the figures load. Our team bonus got cut by 40% because of all the contract terms I gave away to speed up the Thornton signing. My personal bonus basically disappeared. The money I'd counted on for parental leave just evaporated. I stared at the screen, calculating how many weeks of unpaid leave I could actually afford now. The math didn't work anymore. I'd have to go back to work sooner than planned or drain our emergency fund completely. My phone started buzzing with messages from team members. Some were understanding, some were clearly angry. I ignored most of them and focused on Grayson's feeding schedule, but one message was direct enough that I couldn't let it slide. Someone asked if I knew the concessions would tank the bonus before I agreed to them. I typed back the truth. I gave away margin to close faster because my wife was in labor and my manager wouldn't let me leave. If anyone has complaints, they can take them to Dominic. I hit send and put my phone face down on the NICU recliner. Within an hour, Dominic called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. He started with damage control. Said I wasn't thinking clearly due to stress. Offered to tell the team the contract concessions were his strategic decision. That would protect my reputation, but let him control the whole story. I could hear the calculation in his voice. He wanted to look like the hero manager who took the fall for his employee. I declined immediately, told him I was done with any conversation that wasn't through HR or legal channels. The line went quiet for a few seconds. Then his tone changed. He warned me that making this adversarial could impact my career path. He phrased it like friendly advice, but I recognized it as a threat. I ended the call without responding and blocked his number. My hands were shaking when I set the phone down. An email from Warren appeared that afternoon. He requested permission to interview the Thornton team about the meeting timeline and Dominic's behavior. I agreed right away and sent him Joaquin's contact information. I attached the voicemail where Joaquin mentioned Dominic requesting extended discussion time. Warren replied with a simple thanks and said he'd be in touch. The next morning, Rosa found me in the NICU during rounds. She had good news for once. Grayson's oxygen levels had improved enough that the team was reducing his breathing support pressure. She explained this was the first real step toward him breathing on his own. If progress continued, he might come home in 10 days instead of 2 weeks. I felt something loosen in my chest. One thing was finally moving in the right direction. That afternoon, a nurse helped me prepare for skin-to-skin contact. I sat shirtless in the NICU recliner while she carefully moved Grayson from his isolette to my chest. He was so small and warm against my skin. All the monitoring wires draped around us. His tiny heartbeat tapped against my ribs. For the first time since the delivery, I felt like I was actually his father, instead of just a visitor watching through plastic walls. I sat there for an hour, barely moving, just breathing with him and feeling his weight. During a 2 a.m. feeding shift a few days later, another parent started talking to me. Her name was Kara. She was feeding her daughter in the isolette next to Grayson's. She asked how I was holding up, and I gave her the standard tired parent response. Fine. Managing. She nodded like she understood more than I was saying. Then she told me she missed her daughter's delivery too. Car accident on the way to the hospital. The guilt almost destroyed her marriage until her therapist helped her sort out what she could control from what she couldn't. Her words hit differently than the reassurances from family or medical staff. She wasn't trying to make me feel better, just sharing what helped her survive the same guilt. She explained that missing the delivery wasn't the same as choosing to miss it. That Dominic's interference was different from my choice to stay in the meeting. Both were real, but they weren't the same thing. I needed to own my choice without taking on Dominic's manipulation too. The perspective didn't erase my guilt, but it gave me better language for thinking about it. Warren called the next morning with an update. He was removing Dominic as my direct supervisor right away. The change was effective immediately while the investigation continued. I would report to Warren temporarily. Any requests for my time or presence had to go through HR approval now. It wasn't a final resolution, but it was real protection. I thanked him and asked what happened next. He said the investigation would take another week or two. That afternoon, Dominic left me a voicemail. I saw his name on the screen and almost deleted it without listening, but I needed to know what he'd say. His voice was angry. Accused me of using a personal situation as a weapon. Said I was damaging his reputation over standard business decisions. Claimed I was being unfair and emotional. His complete failure to understand what he did wrong just confirmed I'd made the right choice by reporting him. He still saw himself as the victim, still thought his decisions were reasonable. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Warren. Then I went back to the NICU and held my son. That night, I sat in the hospital family lounge with my laptop and started typing a resignation letter. The words came fast and angry. I wrote about Dominic's lies and the deliberate delays and how the company valued a contract over my family. I detailed every phone call to the hospital and every wrong turn in the parking garage. The letter was 3 pages of rage by the time I finished. My finger hovered over the send button for a full minute. Then I saved it to my drafts folder instead. I needed FMLA protection first. I needed a plan for health insurance. I needed to be smart about this, not just angry. Miranda got moved to a regular recovery room the next morning, and I went to see her during visiting hours. She was sitting up in bed looking tired and pale. I pulled a chair close and told her I wanted to talk if she was ready. She nodded but didn't look at me. I said I wasn't asking for forgiveness yet because I hadn't earned it. I told her I wanted to do whatever work was necessary to rebuild her trust. The words felt small and useless, but I meant them. Miranda was quiet for a long time. Then she said she didn't know if she could forgive me, but she was willing to try therapy once we got home. Her voice was flat, like she was reading from a script. I thanked her and she finally looked at me. Her eyes were red from crying. We sat in silence for a few minutes and then I asked if she wanted to talk about what happened during the delivery. She shook her head and said not yet. I respected that and changed the subject to Grayson's progress instead. Before I left, we agreed to start couples counseling as soon as she was medically cleared. Miranda said she needed help processing the trauma of the emergency delivery and my absence. I agreed we needed professional support to get through this without destroying our marriage. She pulled up a therapist's website on her phone and showed me someone who worked with postpartum couples. I said I'd call them tomorrow to set up an intake appointment. The reduced bonus posted to my bank account 3 days later. I stared at the number on my phone screen and felt sick. It was 40% less than I'd budgeted for. My entire parental leave plan depended on that money. I went to Miranda's room and showed her the account balance. She looked at the numbers and then pulled out her own phone. We spent an hour working through our budget together. Cut our grocery spending, canceled subscription services, reduced the daycare budget. Miranda suggested I take 8 weeks of leave instead of 12 to make the finances work. I hated the idea of going back early, but the math didn't lie. We revised the spreadsheet 3 times before finding a version that worked. Warren sent me an email the next morning, asking if I'd be willing to participate in developing a new family emergency protocol for the company. He explained my situation had shown gaps in the existing policies around manager choices during employee personal problems. Leadership wanted to prevent similar situations in the future. I agreed to help, and Warren scheduled a video call for the following week. He said they were looking at mandatory no-meeting blocks when an employee's partner was in active labor. Also, automatic FMLA start at 37 weeks of pregnancy. Clear limits on manager authority during family medical emergencies. I told Warren I'd put together some thoughts and send them over before the meeting. I had a remote meeting scheduled with the Thornton account team to set expectations for my availability over the next 2 months. I dialed in from the hospital family lounge with my laptop balanced on my knees. Joaquin was on the call along with 2 other team members. I explained I'd be on family leave and would have limited availability for urgent issues only. Joaquin interrupted me before I could finish. He said he had 3 kids and remembered the NICU experience. He told his team they'd work with a reduced contact schedule without any problems. The other team members agreed immediately. Joaquin asked how Grayson was doing and actually seemed to care about the answer. The call ended 15 minutes early, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Grayson got upgraded from CPAP to a nasal cannula with low-flow oxygen on day 7. The nurse removed the bulky mask, and I could finally see his whole face. He had Miranda's nose and my chin. His eyes were closed, but his tiny chest moved up and down steadily. Rosa came to get me and said Miranda had been medically cleared to visit the NICU. I walked with Miranda down the hall and watched her scrub her hands at the sink with shaking fingers. When she saw Grayson for the first time, she started crying. Rosa helped her into the recliner and showed her how to hold him with all the wires and tubes. Miranda cradled our son against her chest and sobbed. I stood there watching her hold Grayson and realized how much hurt she was carrying from facing the delivery emergency alone. Warren called me 2 days later to schedule a meeting about the investigation findings. We met in a small conference room at the hospital. Warren had a folder full of papers and a serious expression. He explained the investigation had proved that Dominic made wrong decisions to keep me at work during a family medical emergency. Dominic was getting a formal written warning and required management training. He was also being moved away from any supervisor role over me. I'd report to Warren permanently. The outcome felt small compared to what Dominic had done. A written warning seemed like nothing. Warren must have seen my face because he explained the company's legal problems if they fired a senior employee without clear policy breaks. He was honest that this was the maximum result possible under current policies. That's why they were changing the rules. I understood the legal reality, but it still felt wrong. The company was giving me 8 weeks of FMLA protected leave going back to the delivery date, plus flexible work from home options when I returned. Warren handed me the paperwork to sign. It was a real win, even if it didn't fix the deeper damage. The protection meant I could focus on my family without fear of Dominic getting back at me. I signed the forms and thanked Warren for taking my complaint seriously. He said the company should have had better policies in place from the start. Miranda got discharged 5 days after delivery with a blood pressure cuff and a packet of instructions about monitoring her levels twice daily. The nurse went through warning signs for postpartum complications, while Miranda nodded and didn't look at me. We signed the discharge papers together and then walked to the NICU to spend time with Grayson before she went home without him. Sitting in chairs next to his isolette felt like being on opposite sides of a canyon, even though our shoulders were almost touching. She watched the monitors and I watched her, and neither of us knew how to bridge the space between us. Rosa found us there an hour later and started going through Grayson's discharge planning checklist. The home oxygen equipment would be delivered 2 days before he came home, so we could learn how to use it. Weight checks every 3 days at the pediatrician's office for the first 2 weeks. Follow-up appointment with a pediatric pulmonologist in 4 weeks to assess lung development. Rosa pulled out diagrams of the nasal cannula setup and the portable oxygen concentrator we'd need to take anywhere with Grayson. She showed us how to check the tubing for kinks and what the alarm sounds meant. Miranda took notes on everything while I tried to memorize the steps. The complexity of keeping a preemie alive at home felt overwhelming, but Rosa walked us through each piece with calm clarity until it started feeling possible instead of terrifying. I asked about emergency protocols, and Rosa gave us a laminated card with the NICU direct line and instructions for when to call 911 versus when to call the pediatrician. She made us practice explaining Grayson's medical history in under 30 seconds, because that's what paramedics would need to hear first. I scheduled our first couples therapy intake appointment that afternoon, using a referral from the hospital social worker. The therapist specialized in postpartum relationship repair and trauma processing. Her next opening was 2 weeks after Grayson's expected discharge date. I booked it, and then called Miranda to confirm she'd come. She said yes in a flat voice that told me she was doing it because it was necessary, not because she'd forgiven me. We agreed to weekly sessions, and I put every Thursday at 6 p.m. in my calendar for the next 3 months. That night in the hospital family area, I opened my laptop and started writing everything down. The complete timeline from Miranda's first call at 2:14 p.m. through arriving at the hospital at 7:19 p.m. Every choice I made and every choice Dominic made. The contract terms I agreed to and what they cost the team. The moment I realized I'd valued a business deal over being present for my wife's emergency. I wrote about the strange clarity that came from having my priorities forcibly reordered, how missing Grayson's birth showed me exactly how badly I'd been failing my family. I titled the document, "The Best Thing That Ever Happened," because that's what it was, even though it felt like the worst thing while it was happening. The awareness that came from that day was the only thing that could save us. Without it, I would have kept making the same choices and slowly destroyed my marriage through 1,000 small absences. I saved the document and sent a copy to my personal email in case I ever needed to remember what rock bottom felt like. I drafted a proposal for the new family emergency protocol over the next 2 days between NICU visits. Mandatory no meeting blocks when an employee's partner was in active labor. Automatic FMLA initiation at 37 weeks of pregnancy instead of waiting for the employee to file. Clear limits on manager authority during family medical crises with escalation procedures that went around the direct supervisor if needed. I included specific language about what constituted an emergency and what didn't, and consequences for managers who interfered with employees leaving for legitimate family situations. Warren reviewed my draft during a video call and said he'd incorporate most of my suggestions into the policy revision. Some details needed legal review, but the core framework matched what leadership wanted to implement. He thanked me for turning my experience into something that could protect other employees and said the policy would be named after me internally, even if they couldn't do that officially. A package arrived at the hospital on day 12 with a congratulations gift basket from the Thornton account team. Fancy chocolates and a teddy bear, and a card signed by everyone who'd been in that conference room. Joaquin Wolf had included a separate note on his personal stationery, saying he appreciated my honesty about needing family time, and that it actually increased his respect for me as a business partner. He confirmed they were comfortable with my reduced availability through the end of the quarter, and looked forward to working together when I was ready to fully engage again. The note made me feel slightly less like I'd destroyed my career along with everything else. Grayson came home on day 14 with a small oxygen tank and a nest of monitoring equipment that took over half our bedroom. The first night was complete chaos. Alarms going off every time he moved wrong and disconnected a lead. Feeding struggles where he'd take an ounce and then fall asleep exhausted from the effort. Miranda and I taking turns sleeping in 2-hour shifts while the other one watched the monitors. I stayed present through all of it without checking my work email even once. Didn't look at my phone except to set timers for feedings. Didn't think about the Thornton account or quarterly reviews or anything except keeping Grayson breathing and fed and warm. Miranda noticed around 3 a.m. during a particularly difficult feeding when Grayson kept falling asleep mid-bottle. She looked at me holding him and trying to keep him awake, and she smiled. It was small and tired, but it was genuine, the first real smile I'd seen from her since the delivery. That smile felt like more of an achievement than any contract I'd ever closed. I started interviewing for a lateral move 2 weeks after bringing Grayson home. Different division within the company, same level, but reporting to a manager with a reputation for work-life balance and family-supportive policies. I wasn't running away from consequences, but I also wasn't staying in a reporting structure that had been permanently damaged by Dominic's interference. The new manager's name was Janet, and she had 3 kids and a policy of no emails after 6 p.m. During our first conversation, I was honest about everything that had happened and why I wanted to transfer. She said she respected me for reporting the problem instead of just leaving, and that her team would benefit from someone who'd learned these lessons the hard way. We scheduled a second interview for the following week. 3 weeks after bringing Grayson home, Miranda and I had a quiet moment during a 3 a.m. feeding. I was holding Grayson, and she was preparing the next bottle when she stopped and looked at me. She said she was starting to forgive me. Not all the way yet, but getting there. She said watching me show up completely for the hard parts of parenting was slowly rebuilding her trust, and that she believed I'd learned what actually matters. I told her I missed Grayson's birth, but I didn't miss the beginning of being his father, and that I'd spend the rest of my life proving my family comes first. She came and sat next to me on the couch and put her head on my shoulder while Grayson finished his bottle. We sat there together in the dark nursery, exhausted and healing, listening to the oxygen concentrator hum and watching our son breathe. I felt like we might actually make it through this stronger than we were before. The road ahead was still long, and there would be more hard conversations and more therapy sessions and more moments where the hurt resurfaced. But we were moving in the right direction. That was enough for now. Well, that's the shocking finale no one asked for. If you're still watching, you might be in too deep to turn back. But hey, misery loves company, right? Go ahead and subscribe, we're all bad decision makers here.